Hi, welcome to MediatorPodcast.com, a podcast and video series about mediation, negotiation, and collaboration. My name is Melissa Gragg, and I provide online valuation and divorce mediation services in St. Louis, Missouri. During this episode, we will discuss leadership, team coaching, and conflict resolution for business with Ben Papa. He's actually a leadership coach and Enneagram teacher in Nashville, Tennessee, but works with companies and clients around the country.
But yeah, are you game for talking about ones and sevens and how that works?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So I'll talk mostly about sevens because that'll be more interesting for you. But the sort of the false childhood message, and by the way, all of these childhood messages I alluded to earlier, they're all false.
Okay.
The false childhood message is it's not okay to depend on anyone for anything. And so somewhere in your genetics or in your background or some combination of the two, depending on whether nature or nurture is your go-to or some blend or whatever, somehow you took on from your environment, it's not okay to depend on anyone for anything. So that may or may not resonate with you. Some people can say, oh yeah, I can point to childhood experiences. Okay, you're on board. So that's there. So if that's true, and you know that the world is going to be a difficult place, at least some of the time, you got to have a strategy to do that. And so the strategy that sevens develop basically is to run from the pain. 7 is a super active number on the Enneagram, the need to avoid pain, and they do it by staying ahead of it. And so they're always looking for the next fun thing, the next thing in general, but the next fun thing. There can be a lot of fear of missing out thinking that comes up with sevens. Sevens really don't like to be limited or boxed in any way. They don't having their options limited can feel very stressful for sevens, and so they can sometimes struggle with commitment. They can, at the low end, when they're struggling, they can sometimes struggle with being irresponsible. They need to get their taxes done, but boy, that sounds boring and tedious, and so I'm just not going to do it, and I'm going to go hang out with my friends instead. Extensions. You should file for an extension. They work. So there's a lot of that. So the gift of a 7, every number on the Enneagram has a core gift. And I always want to make sure people know that because people go right to the hard stuff, and that's helpful. But the gift of a 7 is because of this orientation to life of avoiding pain or avoiding difficult emotions. There's this orientation to joy. And so 7s can really help people, partners, teams, spouses, kids, whatever else, find the joy in situations that other people may be harder for others to see. And so 7s are masters at reframing. They can take situations that look difficult and reframe it and kind of clean it up and dust it off so that it looks more positive for people. And they're fun. 7s are often the life of the party. They're often the ones that are saying, well, does this need to be this difficult? Is there a way we can make this a little more easier, more fun? What if we had this meeting at happy hour instead of in this conference room? I mean, they really can bring a lot of joy and positive, upbeat energy to teams, which can kind of raise the temperature in a positive way for everybody on the team. So that's really one of their biggest gifts. By the way, the need to avoid pain is defined very broadly. Pain can be boredom. Pain can be loneliness. Pain can be, having to do something that's tedious, feeling limited in some way. It doesn't have to be like big capital P pain. It can be. They run from that too. And some 7s talk about how they run from other people's pain as much as they run from their own. And so it just kind of depends on how each person rolls. And there's a lot of other variety I could talk about that is probably more than you want to get into here. But does any of that resonate with you? I don't want you to say more than you want to say, but is that making sense?
Yeah, it is really amazing. I mean, but I believe a lot of all of that, my father's been a psychologist and therapist his whole life. I feel like I've been in therapy my whole life, but I never had to pay for it, but I think it's really interesting because I do believe that all of these types of things, whether it's this or anything that helps you to learn what fundamentally drives yourself, because I do think that the self-awareness is a big issue. And if I can understand what fundamentally drives myself, and my good and the bad, right? Well, for my 7, I'm just going to flip the bad to be good in some capacity. But I think it resonates a little because I was like, I don't think I have the need to avoid pain. But when you said everything that you said is absolutely was spot on, unfortunately or fortunately. But I think it's interesting because I do spin a lot of like, oh, what's the silver lining to that? Like there's got to be some positive, like, what did we learn? How do we grow from it? Something like that. And I just thought that I did that over time to just, be positive to my kids or something. But I think that also lends to maybe that's where some of the procrastination comes in,
Mhm.
like avoiding like, oh, I don't want to do that kind of thing. So I thought it was interesting. And what I read when I was reading about it, I thought it was interesting because it said like how to get along with me, engage me in stimulating conversation and laughter, appreciate my grand visions and listen to my stories. And I was like, oh yeah. Don't try to change my style, but accept me the way I am. And be responsible for yourself because I don't need those needy people. And then it said, don't tell me what to do. And I was like, ooh, okay, well, that's spot on. There you go.
It's a limitation. I mean,
Yeah.
humans don't like to be told what to do. It feels like a limitation, and they don't like limitations because if you're limited, then you've got to stop and work within that limit, and you don't know what badness might be in that limit. A lot of this is unconscious, by the way.
Hmm.
So the pull to kind of move on and to move ahead is just it's a fear. So 5, 6s, and 7s, what they're managing below the surface is fear. We call that the Fear Triad, and they have 3 different strategies that they use to manage fear. But the one that 7s use is this kind of staying ahead of it, don't let it catch you kind of idea.
Mm.
But if when you ask a 7 to sort of stop and kind of what's kind of bubbles up for them, particularly when they're under stress, what's below the surface, it's almost always fear. Uh,
Mm.
but you said something I wanted to just point out, which is one of the mantras that I always use when working with the Enneagram is the best part of you is the worst part of you. And that's really important to remember because you're doing life using this ego strategy of 7ness, and it's great in all the ways we described. The work, though, for a 7 is to not let it cross over the line where you're doing so much kind of reframing, so much looking for the good and the fun, and the positive, that you're not dealing with legitimately difficult things that really need to be dealt with for you to be a whole, healthy person. So there's a shift. Reframing can be good. Sweeping things under the rug that need to be addressed is not good. And so
Mhm.
that's part of when I'm working with 7s, what we have to really think about is how do we stop and stay in these great feelings? We're good at that. How do we find a way to integrate the whole spectrum of human feelings? Because the Enneagram is all about balance. And the way 7s are out of balance is on this positive emotion side without kind of processing sadness when they feel sad or owning and processing anger or whatever else comes up for them. So to be a whole, healthy, balanced person, we have to be in all of our emotions in a right sized way and not having this artificial block against the hard stuff. So that's
Mhm.
the growth space for 7s is to find ways to sort of be in all of their feelings as they arrive in real time in kind of this sober, steady way. Sober steadiness is the virtue for 7s. That's what we're trying to kind of cultivate as a 7 as kind of a way of life is sober steadiness in the context of who you are.
Sure. Well, and I always thought, because this is about as vulnerable as I'm gonna get as a 7. Okay,
Right.
but I always thought that it's kind of I have gone through my career as a woman in business with a lot of other men, and I just thought you just train yourself to not be emotional, to not. I mean, I would never cry with a client, and we do divorce, and you could cry every day with some of the stories that you hear, but it was just like a wall that I kind of put up. And I
Mhm.
say, those are those people's emotions. That's their situation. And it's not, I mean, when I used to, at the beginning of my career, when I used to go testify, I would be like, it's not my family's health. It's not my health. So I'm going to do my best job, but I can't, kill myself over. I mean, it just, because it's really stressful.